welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast. I've got a few people here. This is a panel that we've been waiting to, at least for the past 24 hours. So if that makes sense, I've got a few people. I'm going to bring them on stage as well, one by one. I've got Mike, Francis, Chris, James. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming in. And I am super excited for this conversation. By the way, for people who are tuning in, feel free to drop it in the comment where you're coming in from, so we get to know where you're from. And we also get to know a bit about our guest over here as well. And to keep it a bit spicy, what I've done is I would ask each one of you to give, I guess, a little intro about yourself. And also, if you were the one winning $30 billion, what would be the first meal you'll have? All right, Mike, you're up on my screen first, so you go first, man.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Privete, founder of Eternal Security, where I focus on the cybersecurity economics of our industry. And if I were the one who just made the kind of life-changing money like that, I'd probably keep it low key. There'd be signs that I would have some extra money, but I'd probably just go to Shake Shack and get a double, just because that sounds really good right now. But that's where I'd probably go.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. Shake Shack is never a bad idea, man. Francis, you're up next, man.
Thanks again for having us. My name is Francis. I'm the founder of the Software Analyst Cyber Research, where we do a lot of advisory and research work across data, cloud, AppSec, as well as the SOC. If I were the one, you know what? I would just book a flight, honestly, to Italy right away, and then go have a spaghetti carbonara pasta dish. It's been the food top of mind for me right now. And then that would be exactly what I'll just take a one-way vacation maybe, and then go enjoy that meal. So
all right, that's a good one. I kind of like that. James, you're up next, man.
Hello, I'm James. I make engineering content for engineers on cloud and application security and market stuff. I would try to keep it funny and ironic and probably do ramen noodles or something just so I could make haha.
Fair. Chris, you're up here. You're mute, by the way. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Chris Hughes here, CEO at Acquia, and also run the Resilient Cyber podcast and Substack, where I write and talk about a little bit of everything around cybersecurity. For me, I do a mix of what folks said there. I definitely keep it low key in terms of a private meal, but I think I would throw my 5 kids and wife on a private jet and roll off to somewhere really nice and take a private dinner together and do a cool experience.
Oh, I love that. I think, well, of course, when you have that kind of life-changing money, why limit yourself to the local McDonald's, I guess? Why not just go all up? But by the way, we've got a few people coming in. I just want to quickly say hello to everyone as well. I've got Ethan. I can't figure out who the person is, but we have got Patrick. Great speakers today. Beard plus candle equal fire. Shilpi there. Hey, Shilpi. And coming to G-Wiz. Great panel. Hello, gentlemen. Looking forward to the talk from Chicago. Upwind, Newquark. I want to know who has fluffy dogs. I know James has fluffy dogs. I have fluffy dogs.
He got shaved recently. It's sad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he got his haircut. We're all upset.
Anyone else has dogs for Alisa? No, all right, no dogs anymore. All right, someone from Big D in Texas. We got Dublin in the house, and I've got a few Wiz friends from Oscar and Emmanuel as well. Awesome. From Champ. Ramen is amazing. All right, so I've got a few friends from G-Wiz coming in as well. And thank you for the icebreaker. I just thought for my answer, I was going to fly to Japan and have some ramen, but now sounds like, I think that was going to be my thing. Again, I'm not thinking of a Michelin star meal. A simple ramen would do for me. But today we're talking about, obviously, the conversation of the topic for the past 24 hours, 48 hours. Wizardry of Google is kind of what we're aiming at. So my question to start off with is Mike, I'll start with you on this one, because I want to understand what is the current state of cloud security startup as you have seen, because you obviously cover a lot of that on return of security, the investment landscape, and how does this influence the venture capital trends that you've been seeing in early stage companies, probably in the same space as cloud security as well?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And, I think a lot of the people in the venture capital space for the past, several days have been really celebrating. This is obviously a huge kind of success story. It is an anomaly. I will say that. This is the biggest acquisition in the cybersecurity industry to date, as long as it all goes through and checks all the SEC checks. So that alone is staggering. And so I think a lot of people are happy about that. And in the same term, cloud security has been a really evolving space, honestly, for the past 10 years. And I think, there was a lot of people who were saying, oh man, okay, now, cloud security is on the down and out because, well, the biggest player effectively just got, taken out, which I don't agree with. But then, a lot of people are also celebrating, hey, now we can finally compete because Wiz is out of the picture, so to speak. I also don't agree with that. But, I think a lot of people are kind of saying, okay, now that model of cloud security was obviously very successful. There was one dominant player in that world that evolved from cloud security posture management and into the CNAPP space and into the cloud runtime detection and response and all that, all those new acronyms that we love and hold so dearly. But then, people are saying, okay, now it's wave 3. Like that's the next time to go. So I think many are very excited to see like what comes next with security. So a lot of startups or a lot of mid-stage companies are very excited about it. And people are, have been trying to recreate the success of Wiz now for years. So I think we'll see more gunning on that angle.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, James, you have some opinion on over here as well. I mean, I guess from a person who works a lot with other cloud security companies and the area as well, are there any specific areas you feel there'll be accelerations as Wiz goes through this transition period?
Oh yeah, I mean the scary thing about Wiz was not the immediate product, but the potential of the code and defend products on the ASPM code side and then the runtime defend side. Those products are good enough that it was a very scary proposition for people really doing a lot of great innovation still on the code and runtime sides, both of which were not where Wiz started. So it was their weakest point, but they were developing super quickly at it. And I think really that's like the sigh of relief that that I feel like if I'm trying to help look at these vendors' perspective. It definitely opens up while I agree that Wiz will still continue to innovate and innovate quickly, it's going to be hard to really continue on both of those fronts at the same velocity as they focus on mergers, looking at big data pictures, integrating with multi-clouds more and more. Just the reality is it opens up innovation for vendors who are trying to do both the runtime stuff and the code stuff. And so I think that's why I posted the meme I did today of everybody dancing and having a good time, because that was the threat, was that Wiz like boxed them out the whole step of the way on it.
Yeah. Chris, did you have some thoughts on this as well, man?
Yeah, I like where James was going with it, in terms of Wiz having a comprehensive solution in terms of code all the way through runtime. And we see, different players focusing on different aspects of that, kind of SDLC, but Wiz had that full coverage and they were really building it out more with, code and defend and things like that James touched on. I think the question for a lot of organizations now is going to be, do they kind of go back to the kind of age old, point solution versus platform debate and focus on one who has maybe ASPM, or maybe runtime security covered, or do they stick with someone who has a comprehensive coverage across the board and then maybe take their risk of, being acquired by Google, right? And what the impact of Wiz as a product and service, the service you'll get from the supplier, the vendor in this case, will be. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think it's going to be unique for each organization, depending on their budget, their resources, their expertise, things like that too.
Sure. Francis, you have some thoughts as well here, man?
Yeah, just wanted to build upon what everyone has already mentioned. But yes, I think the vendor lock-in is a big question. I also think the question is going to be right between those customers who are hybrid or multi-cloud at the moment. I think many of those customers are currently thinking about, what does this actually mean for us with Wiz? What are the implications of this? And then I also think if you're already a GCP shop already, I think you're probably happy or celebrating that you maybe already have this. But I think we need to figure out that dynamic. And I think there's a lot of questions now around with CISOs in terms of thinking about what are the consequences of this. And then I also think there's a question for AWS and Microsoft, what is that relationship going to actually look like going forward? I think it's going to really be an interesting question. And one last thing I'll just add, together with AppSec and runtime that Chris and James have talked about, I think data security, the DSPM, and then increasingly AI SPM, these were other adjacent areas that like Wiz was already making quite some moves into, like not significantly into the market, but they were making some headways in DSPM and AI SPM. And I do think those guys are also somewhat celebrating too, because they're also like, yep, now like because there's only so much focus Wiz will do with GCP, and I think they're going to have to pick their battles, and they're going to have to drop some of these huge platform potential. So it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve.
Yeah, maybe because the focus today, from at least from all of us, has been what this means for the customers, the CISO practitioners, and others who are looking at this industry. Because there's a lot of concerns that comes in just by, I get your point about everyone's mentioned vendor lock-in. Everyone's already mentioned the part where there's already a struggle between multi-cloud for a lot of companies. That was the competitive edge that, as people talk about in this market. And I don't know of any enterprise that is not multi-cloud today. It'd be surprising if any is. So it almost becomes a question where now traditionally, as cloud has been, we've been covering it for 6 years, and we found that Amazon has always led the race with AWS. They were the first to the market, followed by Azure with Microsoft's strong footprint in the enterprise land. Now, is this the advantage that Google needed to at least come out of the rank 3? Because I think, from my understanding, and you guys would have looked at the report as well, this is the first time they had 5x return on their Google Cloud investment. This is like after such a long time. It actually looks like it could be profitable in spite of all the investments they've done so far. I'm curious if we feel strongly about what Amazon and Azure, they might have to respond to this anyway. James, do you have some thoughts on this? Man, you seem to be nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting play in the sense that I'm open to the idea that, well, first of all, let me start by saying Google has been talking about creating a multi-cloud cloud security tool for a very long time. And this is definitely Microsoft positions Defender the same way, where they're always upset when I don't talk about them as being like this multi-cloud amazing thing. And so definitely, like, this is Google's answer for a multi-cloud security solution. And where it matters from like a bottom line driving GCP adoption thing, there are services within GCP that are very good that people should look at adopting, especially around like GKE and auto deploying containerized applications. Like, it is a good cloud for that. And I think where they're going to have to be really careful is how do you push people towards trusting Wiz as a multi-cloud security solution, who I believe that both the Wiz team and the Google team genuinely want that to be the case. But then it's all going to come down to like the right way to sort of push people into Google Cloud accounts without making them feel like, step one is to create a Google Cloud account to access your Wiz dashboard. So that balance is going to be the key to this success.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to keep throwing around. Chris, do you have some thoughts as well?
No, I really like what James just said there. Something I was going to mention is like, how do we, Wiz has always had this reputation of having multi-cloud security coverage across the 3 largest IaaS providers, right? How do you kind of keep that perception, that reputation now with your, being so directly tied to Google without people feeling like you're losing some of that autonomy across the IaaS providers, and that you won't have to be locked into Google Cloud in particular to have that multi-cloud security coverage? Maybe you can use some of the native services from Google where appropriate, but you want to lean into AWS or Microsoft Azure, et cetera, still as you have been historically, depending on your organization. So, being able to balance that and keep that reputation of being somewhat agnostic, despite literally being owned by Google now, is going to be a really difficult thread, needle to thread.
Yeah. Mike, did you have some as well to add?
Yeah, I think, part of this goes to the larger story that honestly, all the cloud service providers have been trying to tell. If you look at like Microsoft and the run they've had on enterprise security the past couple of years, I think like in 2023 they netted like 20 billion in security revenue alone, not even including much of their extra cloud spend. And so they've all of these major players have tried to center around or create centers of excellence around security. And you can see over the past several acquisitions from Google, with Chronicle many years ago to try to generate a SIEM, with Mandiant, which has apparently worked out pretty well for them in terms of their response capabilities and forensics. And so this is just another vote in that kind of same direction. So in the same way that cloud service providers all have their different strengths and weaknesses to kind of lock in different types of workloads and customers, they're now trying to differentiate on the security aspect as well, which Microsoft has had the run of for a while. And the same people decrying, concentration risk are all Microsoft shop people anyway. So it's kind of it's a bit of a funny point, but so I think this will incentivize some, but then, but since companies are so multi-service and multi-cloud, lock-in really doesn't make sense. Like, you just kind of use the right tool for the right cloud for the right job, Same
Yeah.
way the AI world does as well. You go where like the model is, or the easier thing is, or the better thing is, and you just adapt. And I think we'll see more customers acting that way.
Yeah. Francis, do you have some thoughts as well, man?
Yeah, just to build upon that, I think one thing to also remember too is like Wiz was originally built around AWS for the most part. I mean, obviously, they've always been independent, but they very much a huge part of the go-to-market and success was really built around AWS. And then obviously they had quite a number of partnerships with GCP along the way. Microsoft was always kind of you could always kind of like the friction point because Microsoft always had Defender for Cloud, and Defender for Cloud was quite a decent product on the market. I think on AWS front, we never really knew about their cloud security product. They have a lot of features, like a wide breadth in terms of like just feature capabilities, but in terms of core cloud security, they never really had it. And Wiz was like a really close partner with AWS. And I do think going forward, it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves. And one thing that was very interesting in the investor relations call, if you all watched that video yesterday, was towards the end of it, they mentioned Wiz will be fully integrated within Google Cloud. And that kind of surprised me because normally with acquisitions, at some point you have acquisitions whereby they keep the independent company as like fairly and they retain and keep that brand. And sometimes you just kind of have it where it's like just talk right into GCP. And my expectation was if Google was smart here, they should have still kept that independent brand of Wiz to at least keep that dependency. However, on the call, they mentioned it looks like Wiz will be like fully folded into the core GCP product, which you would guess is natural, but brings about all this conflict of interest, data segregation of data, trust issues. And so I think it's going to be really, really tricky to see how this evolves, and especially with Microsoft. I think Microsoft is the biggest company because Defender for Cloud is quite a decent product many people use out there, and I think there's going to be a lot of questions on how that would work.
Yeah.
Just to add to Francis's comments real quick, kind of goes again to having that autonomy and maintaining that independence for Wiz to some extent. And I think this is where it may open opportunities for other cloud security players. And then among the three that we've been talking about, AWS, Microsoft and Google, of course, Microsoft, as Mike pointed out, is the giant in the room in terms of security revenue. And that's because we're focusing a lot on cloud security, which of course is, kind of the topic of discussion here, but there's also broader enterprise security, and Microsoft, when it comes to endpoints and things of that nature, just has, capabilities and market penetration and coverage that the other two, just historically haven't had. So I think that still puts them in a unique category to some sense, in terms of their coverage of broader security outside of just cloud.
Yeah, and I guess to what you guys are calling out as well, they're definitely an existing set of tools that are already available from other providers. But I think the example that's come to mind with Microsoft as well, they had Azure Sentinel that they were trying to say as quote unquote multi-cloud, but it wasn't really. Then Google Cloud came up with, I think, something called Security Operations Center, which is what's getting combined with Wiz, to Francis, what you were saying. I think the CEO of Google Cloud, Thomas Kurian, on that investor call called out that security operation would be that product where eventually Wiz would kind of become integrated with. And to me, it sounds like, oh, okay, so they already had 4 quote unquote multi-cloud products that they were trying to go for. In all of this, I was also thinking about, I think, funny enough, Deborah just asked the same question. What does this mean for existing customers? And Christopher was talking about the fact that if someone is asking to change their cloud platform just because they're on Wiz, maybe up for trouble. And I kind of share the sentiment in the context that you can't force people to make decisions, but then Google Cloud as a player is they could literally just be multi-cloud as with Mandiant they have been. The Mandiant has continue to be independent. Maybe the initial phase is that. Obviously, only time would tell what comes in that particular perspective. But where I have always thought about this is a lot of James talks about runtime security. I talk about runtime security. Francis talks about runtime security. We already know that cloud security is on that verge of the next evolution where we're talking beyond CSPM and CNAPs now. It's no longer just a virtual machine. We have Kubernetes in the mix as well. We have AI workloads, runtime security, NHI, AI security. I can keep throwing acronyms to what Mike was saying earlier. But the whole thing started with the fact that we don't actually have real-time, capability for understanding security from a security operation perspective. My thinking with the impact on customers on this would be like, what does this mean for the wider space of real-time information on? Is it the fact that now runtime security is going to get a lot more attention because people are going to be pushed in that direction. Hey, CSPM CNAP is no longer enough because it's all native to AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, because they've all incorporated that into cloud natively. So the products you're looking for now to get that extra edge for AISPM or whatever else you want to call it. But I'm sure everyone has thoughts on this. But James, you seem to have the most thought on this. Actually, Francis, do you want to go first?
No, just one thing to just clarify, and then James obviously talks a lot about runtime, so he has a lot of opinion. One thing to maybe if we step back a little bit, is Google Cloud Security or their cloud security offerings. They have like 4 core products. So they have Threat Intel, Google Threat Intel. They have like Mandiant that they acquired a few years, which is more around consulting, like more Threat Intel, more consulting services. It's kind of attached, and then they have like a core SOC, so like an actual SIEM slash SOAR with Amplify. And then they always had the security command center. And actually, security command center was always what it was like the so-called cloud security product, but never really gained like significant amount of traction. And obviously, that's where Wiz will like help fill in that gap. But to your question about runtime, when you actually look at those 3 other products that I actually mentioned, Threat Intel, Mandiant, as well as like just the core SOC product, those were fairly runtime heavy, or you could always say very closely aligned to the SOC, right? The SOC highly relies on Threat Intel to support a lot of the alerts that they're getting with their SIMs. And then if you have like significant more cases, you have Mandiant who comes in to help you with IR and whatnot. And I do think they already had this runtime DNA, if you want to call it, within Google. And I do think it's going to be interesting because, again, I don't really think Wiz had Wiz was amazing and Gem had a lot of capabilities. But I think now it really makes Wiz more of a runtime centric. They're going to be a lot more embedded into the SIM and within the SOC. And it's going to be a lot more interesting. I do see more of this runtime conversation happening as a result of where Google Cloud Security offerings were already. But maybe James has something to build upon that.
Yeah, I think maybe I should clarify. I think what I was trying to get to was as well that when I said it means more like cloud security is going beyond CSPM CNAP, is because most of the enterprises that I'm talking to, they all have started shifting cloud security alerts to the SOC teams now. Like security operations have become responsible for looking at security alerts from CSP cloud providers of Wiz and any other cloud security product out there. I think what this seems to be so far, this is like a 10,000 feet view across the board. Google is trying to focus on runtime security. All the vendors and other vendors in the space have been trying to start focusing on runtime security. Security operations in general is becoming the focus point for cloud security now, whether it's your cloud native on your cloud provider or otherwise. I definitely feel there's a trend coming, or if it's already there, that most enterprises are already doing it. But James, feel free to add more, man. I think you're definitely have an opinion on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the runtime innovation stuff is still so early, and it's so I mean, I've been saying it's the year of cloud runtime since 2018, and I'm just hopeful that it's finally actually this year. But fundamentally, I think this is a different play where it's about I don't know how else Google could have entered this market where like I'm your standard DevOps person, and if my CISO said like, let's take a look at Azure for defending our Kubernetes clusters, I'd be like, okay, no, like that's not gonna happen. And I think that people in the DevOps, dev, CloudSec ecosystem like Wiz enough that I'm not just laughing at the idea of a GCP security solution for my AWS clusters now, and that's the advantage to them. I don't think that when it comes to the more innovative side of things, like putting container and application stories together, the stuff that I'm talking about, like some of those advanced workload runtime security stories, I'd have to search more for the story there. There is a benefit, like what Francis was saying about if you run a more traditional SOC that's based more on like the SIM, there is actually, I think, a little bit of tension between Wiz's defend capabilities as like the single pane of glass, if you want, for like a SOC sort of view that was very early in getting developed. I think this is much more about the average enterprise cloud security person who is trying to wrangle this massive, complicated multi-cloud infrastructure, do vulnerability analysis, be compliant, deploy secure infrastructure. This is about winning that customer and opening them into Google's ecosystem, as well as getting access to the data of what they're running on those different clouds so that Google can make strategic decisions about what they should develop and where they should strengthen their platform. When it comes to the security specific innovations, that's why I focused on like that code and defend side. I really don't think that factored very much into like the calculus here.
Yeah, I think I also I agree with it. I also want to add that it's an interesting dichotomy for I guess people who will be tossing between Google Cloud and Wiz choices at the moment, or whatever the other cloud provider may they be looking at. Because Azure, as I was saying earlier, Azure Sentinel tried doing this earlier, didn't work because people, even though to what Mike said earlier, most of the enterprises are very Windows heavy shop. Microsoft kind of has dominated that security space for a long time. And even then, they were not able to make Azure Sentinel that one product. It's an uphill battle, especially if you're number 3 trying to become number 2 or number 1 as a Google Cloud. So I think it'll be their work would be cut out. Another question which I had, and I think Marina kind of jumped on it as well, is that do we even believe that the SOC currently is equipped or to even understand what a CNAP alert is? Who wants to take that first? Chris, I think.
I was just going to comment on this because I saw this question coming in. I really liked it. And I know James and I have talked about this a good bit. Is like, we're focusing a lot on the tech, right? The tools, the products, which is important, but there's a workforce element to this, a human element to this. And a lot of these teams in the SOC environments aren't, historically haven't been exposed really at depth in terms of skills, knowledge, expertise of cloud environments, whether it's, AWS, Azure, GCP, you name it, or more of the kind of DevOps, cloud native paradigm that we're used to now with cybersecurity. So I think that's a factor there. And, that is, of course, a problem, but it also offers an opportunity when we see like the rise of, agentic AI, powered SOC type environments that Francis has written so much about, is maybe that can accelerate that gap and that knowledge, transfer, or, if you want to call it that, to that part of the workforce, because they can lean into these technologies to help them make sense of things that they just simply, don't have the experience or exposure to, these cloud native environments and, technologies like that. So I'm curious, like, Francis and James likely have some commentary on that too.
Yeah, Francis, you have some thoughts on this as well?
Maybe James, go first if you have. I think that dilemma is still there. I quite frankly don't even have an answer in terms of how they're actually going to go solve for it. But there is a skill gap, we know. Obviously, I think there's a lot of like the Mandiant world, and there's a lot of like IR stuff in and around Google or existing that they have right now that might help beef up like what that talent actually looks like. But it's going to be one of the big questions they have to ask themselves going forward with this acquisition. And quite frankly, I don't think I have an answer, really. I think it's something that everyone's going to have to figure out eventually.
James?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like no to answer the question. Like, as far as does the SOC have the ability, it's not a knowledge issue. When we talk about CNAP, if we think of the posture alerts, like it's not a knowledge thing. It's just a SOC analyst doesn't have access to Terraform to change the deployment, and you probably don't want them to. But when it comes to that, and I think that's fundamentally like the Wiz acquisition is fundamentally about like that posture data visibility problem. And I think that's why this is like less about the SOC, because I feel like Mandiant's already doing pretty well from like a SOC standpoint. And it's more about there's this giant market of cloud security that developed. And it developed sort of separate from the SOC. And I think this is more about how do we capture that audience and get them into a cloud provider platform. And I really think a big acquisition like this is like the only way to really do it, or else it comes across as like, am I really going to go buy Google's cloud thing for my AWS cluster? Like, probably not. But with this, it makes me think twice. Like, maybe I do want to keep using Wiz, even though it's owned by Google. If it all comes down to that UX and like how they do the transformative process. Yeah,
I think maybe I do want to call out that the traditionally SOC people have been really amazing at on-premise. They've spent years in it, so they understand every threat that comes out of the door. They've basically been experts in all the low-level stuff that security threats have brought in. Because they have the tools for endpoint. Nowadays, obviously, with the cloud alerts, you can't expect a SOC person to always go back to a cloud security engineer or a DevSecOps person to figure out, hey, is this a false positive, or is this something I should be investigating and calling up an incident response thing? And the funny thing is, I think we did a recent episode on incident response as well as on Azure, and we're talking about how there are gaps there as well in terms of how native can you really go versus the actual reality of being native. That also brings up a gap where if there is innovation which is probably stalled, and if capabilities like the multi-cloud is kept at bay from people, would it really be valuable for people to continue using it or switching? Because SOC would not still find value from it. I know there are a few questions coming in, but I also, on that multi-cloud thing, I'm also curious from people, for people who are considering this world at this point in time, who may be customers of Wiz, what does that mean for building a strategy to whether this in whichever direction goes, if it becomes agnostic or if it integrates into it? Is there something that comes to mind that people should be doing at the moment where in their cloud security program or project to kind of be prepared for this if they were changing anything? I mean, if you, James, what you were saying, if you're Google Cloud, you just don't have to do anything apart from just sit and wait and see what happens. But if you are some of the other ones like the Azures or the AWS's world, I don't know, Mike, did you have some thoughts on this as well, man, as a former CISO as well?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to like the risk tolerance of the organization that it is too, because you have to remember like cloud decisions are well outside of cyber decisions typically.
Yep.
And a lot of organizations do multi-cloud because they're wary of failover, concentration risk, availability zone getting, knocked out in the middle of the day. And so like a lot of these things, there will be the certain risk averse customer who says, "Ooh, I don't want to put all my eggs in that one basket just to do cloud security." And then there'll be others who say, "Well, it's not really that big a deal. I'll go with them anyway because I believe they're the best on the market right now." And so, like, there will be that push and pull. I think there is a point of kind of diminishing returns, I think, when it comes to like resilience on some of these decisions. Because like, is it better to use the better tool, or is it better to use a different tool that's has a 0.0001% chance of failing over, just so you can say to the regulators or to your auditors that you've thought about the resiliency aspect of it. So there's always kind of a tie back in the business component, in addition to like the financial aspects of it as well, because people are cost sensitive pretty much all the time when it comes to this stuff. And so then it depends on, well, which bucket of money does this particular spend come out of? Is it a cloud bucket? Is it a cyber bucket? Those are very different buckets. So as much as you want them to play together, they don't talk to your SOC bucket or your AI bucket. So like that's a lot of stuff to consider that people are now trying to like risk process through, I think, companies.
Just to add,
sorry,
I was to add a little bit to what Mike said. I think that's a double-edged sword with the conversation we hear about, concentration risks and vendor locking and things like that, because I, as a practitioner that's worked with a lot of organizations using multiple cloud providers, on the flip side of that concentration risk is complexity. And if you don't have a workforce that's equipped to manage those multiple different cloud providers environments, the multiple disparate configurations, getting the systems to talk to one another, like you likely introduce more risk trying to do that in a lot of scenarios, depending on your organization's, capacity and capabilities, than you do of, just leaning on one provider and letting them do what they do well. So it's a double-edged sword depending on the organization for sure in terms of their maturity.
Yep. And sorry, James or Francis, if you guys want to add anything to this?
I think this a lot of the what does this mean for a CISO? Should I plan to switch or whatever? It really comes down to how Google handles the actual transition here. And first of all, like there is a flip where if the regulators disapprove the deal, Wiz makes $3 billion in a new funding round, and like that is a scary. All of a sudden, the party from all the other vendors turns into like real scary mode. But aside from that, it's all going to come down to how the transition happens. If I was Google, I would let Wiz's brand sort of shine, keep it very separate, and just be super light touch about the transition. But if they try to come out and say like, hey, Wiz's backend is now 100% Google Cloud, congrats, like all that, a CISO's mind is just going to go like, great, now my data's in another cloud provider, I got to freak out about that. And there is a way in which this is successful, but it's going to come down to like the details of how the transition happens.
Keeping it agnostic would be the key.
Just want to double click, really want to double click on what James just mentioned. I think that's so important in terms of retaining Wiz's independent brand while still keeping it on the company. And to his point, so just want to double click that. And then just the other thing I'll just build upon is I think whatever the acquisition will is scheduled to close at the end of 2026. Sorry, by the end of the year, into 26. And I do think the terms and the agreements will be very important for CISOs or practitioners to actually look to actually see in terms of transparency. And also, I think Google has to really be very transparent in terms of the terms and agreements, in terms of how this will actually unfold, what this means in terms of the data segregation, in terms of when they're scanning assets or looking for misconfigurations on other workload. What does that look like? So I think transparency on Google's front, I think on practitioners' front, they have to also look very closely at the agreement. So it'd be very interesting. One very quick thing I just wanted to maybe briefly add to the broader conversation that maybe we haven't brought up is AI, like just in terms of AI models, because I'm also trying to justify why Google will pay $32 billion. I mean, we have to like think about that. Like this was like a 30x or about 40x plus multiple. And I do think AI, like Google as a whole, they're investing significantly in Gemini, right? We all know about what they're doing on the AI front. And I do think increasingly, I think the bet is also with AI models being deployed on the cloud. They see a significant opportunity for both assets and as well as discovery scanning as a big market that they're actually looking at. So I think this will interconnect with some parts of what they're thinking about their AI ambitions, their open source ambitions, and how they're securing cloud workloads as that market grows. And we're sticking a role here. So I don't know what that looks like precisely, but I suspect it's probably one of the reasons why you pay this much, especially when we're like 20 years into cloud security. And sorry, 15 years into cloud security. You know.
Yeah, I think they're saying that the AI market is expected to be about 750 billion. So it's almost like almost 100 times more than the cloud computing market is going to be. So the multiples already, I'm sure, if the deal goes through, is going to pay off right by there. But I think you mentioned an interesting point, because when I was reading through this yesterday, and we're talking about the whole what does this mean from a Google perspective for whether they have an advantage thanks to this in the cloud security space because they were number 3. Potentially, this means they can come to number 1. The AI space was an interesting one because in the AI conversation, even now, at least being the race for who would be the default cloud provider for AI, AWS and Microsoft are the 2 names that keep coming up still, with Microsoft leading that clearly with OpenAI. And Google Cloud, unfortunately, yes, there's Gemini, but they have been more known in that B2C space rather than the B2B enterprise space that Google wanted to kind of go into. So at least I feel there is that take on this as well for me personally, because enterprise means regulatory compliance is important. There are these standard pillars, assurances. There's a lot that goes into doing security and working in enterprise. Actually, I'll be curious to know from Chris as well, because you kind of work with the public sector quite a bit. And I guess what do something like this, obviously with the regulatory pressure that comes with this and the influence of compliance strategies, what does this mean for regulatory standards where you have to be agnostic in a public sector? Or I'm sure there's some regulation for it. I'll let you explain what the impact of this in public sector is.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting one in the public sector in particular, because Wiz, I've actually been collaborating with their public sector team a good bit, and a lot of great folks over there. They made a lot of solid investments in terms of public relations and solution engineering, you name it, sales, et cetera. Folks who know this ecosystem and have making a big push into the federal ecosystem with U.S. federal civilian agencies, Department of Defense, and things like that. And Google, ironically, has been doing the same, shaking off some kind of bad reputations they had around turning down some work a couple of years ago in the DoD space, that they had to recover from. So they've been making some big hires there too. So both have collectively been pushing into that space. That's more on the BD side of things. But in terms of the compliance and regulatory piece, I'll argue that Google is just about as good as anyone in terms of meeting the multiple disparate compliance frameworks and helping you navigate that requirements as a consumer on their platform. And then if you have Wiz in the mix of that, you can get that security coverage across multiple cloud environments, not just Google. So it's a really strong play in that regard from my perspective.
Yeah. Anyone else wants to add on the whole public sector piece as well there? I think everyone agrees with Chris. This is how I agree. Well, I think one thing I'll definitely call out, and I think Chris can confirm this, because the DoD as well as the entire public sector's landscape is primarily, again, AWS and Microsoft, because they've had deep relationships there for years. They've kind of hired people to bring that relationship on board as well. It'll be really interesting, which I thought about it earlier, but I'm going to bring it up now, because I think once you become part of another cloud service provider, the advantage you used to have as a external person, that you get access to roadmaps for where it's going, now you'll be a step behind on all of that as well. Now, either you're innovating yourself and figuring out a new service comes out from AWS or Azure, how quickly can I get behind it? This was the whole reason why people were against creating their own security solutions in the first place, because like, oh, how do I keep up with it? But we were fortunate that the cloud security product companies were working closely with these cloud service providers. But once you tie up closely with one, does that mean the remaining two don't talk to you? It's like, I think that is still yet to be seen, and maybe that could have impact on the public sector as well. Please, I don't know if anyone has thoughts on this.
Just last comment from me on that is like, you raise a good point. Is we talked a lot about concerns around vendor lock-in with Google and concerns from customers, but there's also something to be said here of what's going to happen with the other major CSPs collaborations with Wiz in terms of how much they're willing to kind of share with them about roadmaps, features, functionality, integrations, things like that, knowing that they're going to be working directly kind of adjacently to their competitor and Google. So it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out, in terms of their partnership with Wiz directly. So I'm curious to watch that.
Yeah, same. I think even if they keep it agnostic, I wonder if Amazon and Azure would maintain the reputation of treating it as a competitor rather than a partner. It'll be really interesting. But I think on that note, I've got another question in terms of success metrics, because I think the conversation started with talking about how cloud security has kind of evolved beyond CSPM and CNAPs as well now. And we have all these new acronyms that Mike was trying to rattle out, but we ran out of time to rattle out all of them. What is actually, out of curiosity, what does success mean these days in the cybersecurity world for programs? I'm curious, because I think now with this Wiz and Google Cloud, I guess whatever ends up happening after the regulatory thing comes through, if they go through or if they don't go through, do you guys believe that apart from the evolution of cloud security to being a beyond CSPM CNAP conversation, does this definition of success has changed as well, like in terms of what used to be a success metric before, that I've knocked off all the CSPM alerts, that was the number one priority, and now what is that now in this world of we're moving towards runtime security, SOC operations being the people who see cloud security alerts? What does that mean for program success now? Like, what are people using as a measurement of success for the security programs in these modern cloud native environments? Who wants to take a stab first?
I mean, it's a complex question, because I think there's really two buckets. And one bucket is people like PagerDuty, who are like cloud native SaaS, where I was at, like, very strong guardrails program, great. Like when we plugged in a CSPM, for example, it wasn't the typical like, oh, what are we going to do? The sky's falling. It was like, oh yeah, we know about what's going on. And so I think for people, there's a certain part of the market that's that mature. But I think most people are pretty overwhelmed with their current CNAP misconfiguration stuff and are just looking for ways to, prioritization is the word of the day for security teams. And I think ultimately that'll transform the remediation, because it has to, because in my mind, the reason there's so many alerts is because fixing a single one is just so hard. And so I think there's a few things on the roadmap. There's one, Tam Noon commented earlier, and that's like an MDR approach for CNAP is an interesting idea around it. It's going to be about how do we help people actually take action. They've got their CSPM, they've got their CNAP, they see that there's a ton of issues, and how are they going to actually get those things fixed? And so there's a ton of buzz on like the prevention side. Fundamentally, I think that's the strength of ASPM, because to me, like if you're not using infrastructure as code, like step one of your CSPM journey should be implement infrastructure as code. And that moves us into the code side. And then on the runtime side, I think just having this, my metric for success that I don't know if I've ever achieved is have the SOC troubleshoot a single like container alert without having to involve the DevOps team. That's like the metric of success ultimately, is like, how can we make it so you don't have to go to like, oh, there's an alert on this pod, I have to call in the chief architect to figure out what it even means. And so I think those are the two different sides of the equation.
I love what James said there. Is like, I think we're seeing a shift in the industry, and obviously I'm biased. I talk about vulnerability management and AppSec stuff a lot. Is like we're shifting from just finding problems to actually fixing problems and knowing which problems to fix and which ones matter. And in the AppSec space, of course, that's things like known exploitation, exploitability, reachability, business contacts and asset data sensitivity, things like that. And then the CSPM side is looking at the architecture, having attack paths, visualizations, things like that that'll help you prioritize where you take action. match. And so I think that's where we're seeing, startups and innovators rally around those kind of things. Is like not just show you more problems, but help you actually fix things.
Yeah, I definitely believe that we are on this path to recognizing where the gaps are as well too. And I think what both James and yourself, Chris, what you mentioned about the prioritization, although it feels like a bit of a repeat of history, we did try doing auto mitigation in the past. That definitely did not end up well. Hopefully AI probably does it better and filtering out the information that would be there as well. In terms of at least the way success metrics for me, and before I kind of answer, but Mike and Francis, did you guys want to have a stab at success metrics, what it looks like, or are you guys happy with James and Chris?
I think just to really just emphasize what both of them mentioned is think of Wiz acquired DAS. So like if you actually think about the fact that like ever since that rumored acquisition happened in the summer, what happened in the fall was they acquired DAS. And again, a big part of DAS obviously was around this level of prioritization and helping with remediation, which also tells you, I mean, you actually need to look at like Wiz's acquisitions to have a really good glimpse of like their prioritizations, right? Like Raft more on the code side, Gem more on the CDR runtime side, and most recently getting DAS for I don't remember this precise amount. And I think it tells you as well, like this is going to increasingly be a part of where we're at now in this cloud security journey. So just to really build up on that, and yeah, so that's kind of what I'll say.
Awesome. Mike, did you have something to add?
I mean, yeah, I agree with everybody else's points as well, but it's also recovery, resilience, like that kind of ability to like shortcut, not just a list of like red blinking lights that say these things are misconfigured. It's going to be important. It's got to be contextual, and that's really what AI is like. That's really what the security community wants AI to solve, is the context problem and shortcutting that path to taking action quicker. So you have the right methods and the right tools to make the decisions like when you need it.
Yeah, and I think there's already a pattern in the AI space, at least what we're talking on the AI cybersecurity podcast. We're also realizing that the innovation is happening around the red team, the security operations side. There's already work in play for how deep can we find a vulnerability across the entire landscape. In spite of, I think one thing has always been the case where send me all the logs was a meme that's been floating around for a long time in security. And fortunately now, thanks to AI, hopefully we can make some better sense of it before it even reaches a scene provider to reduce the overall cost as well. And I think I want to talk about from a success metric, a lot of the CISOs that I've been working with across enterprise, cost to what we spoke about earlier has been a big thing this time. And if this could be an advantage for Google Cloud in this context, but if being cloud native means that while you still maintain multi-cloud could mean reduction in cost, that could be a big factor for a lot of companies to use that as success metrics that, hey, we've overall reduced the cost that security has causing us by still keeping multi-cloud. That could be one route. If they don't, I guess, that's assuming AWS and Azure don't do any more innovation and continue to, which is not possible. But if it was the case, then maybe that could become a thing. The other thing that I kind of think of from success metrics is at least the onset of security operation getting the importance also means that finally people can talk about what incident response in cloud would look like. I don't think that we've had a conversation about incident response in cloud for a long time. To Mike, your point about resilience. If something does happen, line of times we don't even know if we can actually react to it properly. Can the security operation person get to the cloud account that they want to be? So I think for me, platformization is an interesting conversation coming up to bring all that together. The other one has been just measuring the right metrics. AI would hopefully make some of that, but I think those are some of the ones key in my mind. James, do you have some thoughts as well before I kind of come to the next question, man?
I think it's important to recognize that a lot of this focus on cloud incident response, in my estimation, is a reaction to Wiz so thoroughly dominating like the traditional CSPM, asset vuln management, that whole piece of cloud. And I think what'll be interesting is if that continue, like that's considered a solved problem, like ... by Wiz. And so the challenge I think is going to be like how much of that if that changes at all, I'm not sure as a result of this too.
Actually, that brings up another point as well, because to your point about the research, like a lot of people were making decisions on which provider to go for based on the research that was coming out from them as well. They had a lot of researchers who were coming out with Azure vulnerabilities, AWS vulnerabilities, and Google Cloud vulnerabilities. Sorry.
I was going to say, when you mentioned like if AWS stops talking to them, like I know enough of their researchers are like discovering API endpoints before it feels like AWS is aware that they've launched a service, and so like I wasn't super worried about their ability to keep up on that side.
Yeah, and I think apparently they have a program as well now, but I think it goes without saying that I wonder what this means from a research perspective as well for the cloud space as well. If we actually end up having, oh, I think Chris is going to come back in a few seconds. It is Elgato no signal, but I think it definitely means, what does it mean from a, I guess, research perspective would be very interesting to unravel, because a lot of decisions were being made on the fact that, oh, the latest research is by this particular, oh, you came back, Chris, perfect. Latest research is from Wiz, or latest research from X company, Palo Alto, Prisma Cloud, or whatever. I wonder how much of that would reduce now, and if they would go harder against AWS or Azure, because I mean, Google does have Project Zero that they talk about. So I don't know. It'll be really interesting, because I think initially there has been some conversations about a lot of vendors have to tread lightly with the cloud provider because you don't want to break the relationship. But now that you are yourself a provider, does that mean you go really hard on the other person? That is yet to be determined. I don't know, Chris, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to pick on any particular provider, and again, it goes to their outside presence in terms of penetration and revenue. But Microsoft, as we talked about, has tens of billions of security revenue, but they're also like the perpetual leader on the CISOs known exploited vulnerability list, and they've had many visible security incidents, even last year being called a national security threat by members of Congress. But they closed the year with tens of billions of dollars in security revenue, including massive federal contracts. So it's quite a conundrum in that regard. I don't know if it makes an impact or not, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's yet to be seen. So, I mean, in the last 5 minutes that I have for this live stream, I think I've gone through all the questions that were there. A few commentary, which are probably relevant around federal government and things would change. And a few, thank you to everyone who's been kind of sharing questions and commentary as well. So we've tried involving as much as we can. Before we go, what's the final thoughts on this? I know we have a timeline set from Google Cloud on when they'll finish this investor and all of that. Maybe we'll have a round 2 at that point in time. Final thoughts on this particular subject, because I don't even know how many people would talk about this in that much detail as we have over here. But Mike, any final thoughts on this before we kind of wrap up this live stream then?
No, I think it's a good story for the security industry, and I also think it's also a nod, basically to the public markets, or what's not there anymore. Because if you remember last time, and the story around Google walking away, and for whatever reasons from the last time that Google made an offer, it was, we're going to stick it out on our own. And then now it's a very different term. It's a different year. The markets are very different, and this is just another sign, a kind of a vote against going public. And so I do wonder if we'll see more companies follow that same route this year.
Awesome. Thank you. Francis, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think one thing we didn't really speak too much about is CrowdStrike. So CrowdStrike actually has a very dominant cloud security product. In fact, just last quarter, they reported
Come on, man.
about what, 6?
Everyone's equal.
I think, I just wanted to just raise that again. Just awareness for everyone. Just think about the cloud security business was growing 600 million ARR, which apparently isn't too far off from Wiz's ARR. So, and then growing about 45%. And I think we also, just something to think about is like, obviously, CrowdStrike being really close to the Windows environment in terms of like their scanning capabilities. And then obviously Wiz not being maybe as strong in terms of Windows versus like say Linux type operating system. So I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's just going to be an interesting to see the rise of potentially CrowdStrike or even Palo Alto's role as well. So I do think it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with those big competitors, even relative to some of the up and comings that we talked about. I think another potential thing to just think about too is bundling. We know Microsoft is very, very skilled at the level of bundling under the E5 licenses. Could we see, and then we also know Palo Alto has done platformization. CrowdStrike has recently done that actually after their incident. And I do think, will Google do something quite similar in terms of how they bundle their products now with the other existing SIM? It'd be interesting to see. And I think the last thing, just more questions for the industry to think about is AI models, right? As we deploy more managed AI models into cloud environments, what does that whole posture look like? What does that whole scanning capability look like? And I think something around cloud and AI will come out of this. I think that's also part of Google's bet around this. I think we don't know what that looks like, but I think these are just questions we all the industry needs to think about, broadly.
Oh, what if Google Cloud gives it for free to everyone, and just for using Google Cloud accounts, just give away for free? That
And
would
you know why? You know why I won't be surprised with that is if you guys know, for the last maybe 3 or 4 years, Google has been the third, like they've been behind Microsoft as well as AWS in terms of growth, market share, and they just haven't been able to grow as fast with those guys. And I do suspect something like that could happen to juice up the growth for Google Cloud. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yep, awesome. Chris, any final thoughts on this, man? Thanks, man.
Yeah, just from my perspective, again, looking to see how Wiz, maintains some sense of autonomy and agnostic stance towards the large three, CSPs, now that they're part of one of the three. And then to Mike's comment, this is something that a friend of ours, Cole, has wrote quite a bit of Strategy of Security, where he talks about cybersecurity increasingly going private. We did hear earlier that they turned down the deal. They were going to go for the IPO. Yep. Wait, maybe not, right? Maybe the market said something differently, and now we're seeing cyber, increasingly again go private. Again, in this case, with one of the largest cyber acquisition ever. So something for investors, founders, stuff like that to keep in mind, and really awesome conversation.
Yeah, awesome. James, final thoughts, man.
I won't take Francis's bait to talk about CrowdStrike. I just got to keep telling myself that. But the thing I want to address is I think I see a certain vein of like haters saying the 32 billion was like how is this comical, how'd this happen? And I think that underestimates like Wiz really could have, and I'm struggling to use past tense or not because it's still a possibility, but I think this makes it less. But like they could have dominated AppSec, CTEM, CloudSec, and the SOC. And like that's the speculative money question that made the acquisition what it was, because they had a clear path to doing that. And I'm sure they would want me to say that's still going to happen. We Google's going to empower us to do whatever. But I think I think the valuation was about correct, and I think that puts me in a minority majority, maybe silent majority on it. I don't know.
No, I mean, they're definitely impactful, though. I think to your meme on your latest recent LinkedIn post does a good job of explaining what actually the relief that a lot of people may have had because of that announcement. And again, to your point, if it goes through, but if it doesn't go through, it might actually be backfire.
Then we're all back to the hatches.
Yeah.
It's a scary time again.
I mean, I don't know if it'll backfire at that point. If it doesn't go through, then people may start like, oh, wait, you guys were saying it's going to be an amazing experience, blah, blah. But I will leave the social handles for all of your, online work that you guys do for everyone on the podcast episode as well. But thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you everyone who tuned in and shared their opinion as well. And I think love the commentary that went on. And thank you for everyone who's going to tune in later on as well. Thank you, everyone. And we will chat to you on the next live stream at this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing